Welcome to today's episode of People and Strategy. We are recording live from the Executive Network Visionaries Summit. I'm your host, Mo Fatalbab, President of International Facilitators Organization. People and Strategy is a podcast from the SHRM Executive Network, the premier network of executives in the field of human resources. Each week, we bring you in-depth conversations with the country's top HR executives and thought leaders. For today's conversation, I'm excited to be joined by Darnell Lee, the CHRO for the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer for the United States House of Representatives. We'll be talking about his unique role as well as workforce planning. Welcome, Darnell.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you.
Great to have you with us. Darnell, tell us about your career journey and what brought you to the field of HR.
Well, interestingly, I wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor, as I started off in my career. But the more I got into, college and thinking about what I wanted to do, I leaned into organizations and psychology and behavior. And so I realized, I wanted to help people out, but, I wanted to lean in more to organizations. So I'm an organizational behavior guy, and I started my career in HR and leaned into consulting, moved into more internal HR, and then began to connect to some of the more strategic parts of HR. So, I learned that, HR is more than just the operational pieces. It really is a strategic partner. And that's where I sit now.
And as the CHRO of the CAO for the U.S. House of Representatives, you are in a very interesting position. What is it like to have that government role?
Really interesting. So I've had some time in private sector and public sector. And one of the things that I think is unique about the legislative side behind the scenes is that it actually moves really fast, much faster than you may predict or think. Most people think, private sector or public sector, I should say, they think slow. Antiquated. But because of our mission and who we focus and who we're, really supporting on a day-to-day basis, we have to adapt. We have to move. And that has been really a surprising, part of being part of the CAO and the legislative side.
Well, that is fascinating because that is exactly the opposite of what we might expect. So how do you adapt to this fast-changing environment?
Well, I think, when you think about the legislative government, you think about the House of Representatives, the stakeholders change, very quickly. You think every 2 to 4 years now, we could have a change in leadership. And so priorities change. People change, expectations change along the way. And so we really have to be able to adapt to meet those expectations. And it really means that we have to be nimble. We have to be ready to shift ourselves in a different way. And that is setting up the organization to be focused on, excellence. One of our taglines is, we want to be the premier service organization to the House of Representatives, and that we are excellent in everything that we do. And so to do that, we have to be able to adapt, really quickly, especially when the environment changes.
And you also have to be apolitical, correct?
Yes, we support both sides of the House. Our role here is to support the administrative arm, not the political pieces, but to ensure that the administrative pieces that we do support work seamlessly and effectively so that they can, really do their constitutional duties.
And I understand you have 2 HR organizations, one internal, which you lead, and one human capital group for member and committee staff. How did that come to be that you have 2 HR organizations?
Well, I think just as, I was speaking to just a second ago, it's about being able to shift and adapt. And so having one organization with one focus works well, but as the organization changes, as more and different people come into member offices, some from public public policy, some from medicine, some from business. We really have to think about how do we adapt to the needs of people in a 2-year window. And so we look to modernize HR. And so one of those things is having a dual lens, an internal lens where we're focusing on the staff to ensure that we're providing excellent service, from a skills perspective, hiring the right people, et cetera. And another from a consultative perspective, ensuring another administrative piece of doing the work of members and committees is that they have some HR expertise. We have something called an HR hub that the Human Capital Group leads and pushes out, and it's really gives them some just-in-time best practices for the HR side.
Smart leadership means smart investments. Equip your team with the future-focused strategies they need at SHRM Talent 26 in Dallas, April 19th through the 22nd, and save $200 on every ticket when you register by December 19th. You can learn more at shrm.org/talent26-podcast.
So, Darnell, who are the stakeholders that you report to as CHRO? And how do you keep all those stakeholders on the same page, particularly because there's so many of them?
Exactly. So traditionally, we have our line of leadership that serves as stakeholders. So I have a deputy chief administrative officer, the chief administrative officer, of course. And then organizationally, from an institutional perspective, we have both the speaker and the minority leader who have a direct impact on, what our focus is, what our priorities are across the organization. But we also have members in committees that are doing the legislative work, but they're also members of Congress. So they're sometimes a boss of ours as well as those who are customers, so to speak, of the services that we provide. And so we're always having to balance, multiple perspectives and multiple priorities and multiple needs from a 2-year to 4-year basis, because people have elections every 2 years. So we always have to stay on the cutting edge and always think about how do we deliver our services in a way that is easy for people to engage, as well as help them to do their legislative work that they've been elected to do and have the staff to bring on to do as well.
So that is a good place to shift gears and talk about workforce planning. How do you approach that in your organization?
So workforce planning for us really has turned into be more of a discipline and not just a process that we engage in from time to time. And so from an HR perspective, we focus on a couple of different things. We focus on ensuring that whatever we're doing around workforce planning, that it's mission focused. It's focused on what we're here to do and who we're here to serve. Also making sure that we have the data that we need on a regular basis, not just looking at a static time and at a static time or a static point in time. Also, engagement is hugely important for our process, and we're always looking on how to adapt and be flexible because we have to, of course, as I said, shift, all the time, depending on what the priorities are.
So, Darnell, when it comes to ensuring that employees meet organizational needs, how do you assess the skills of your talent?
So, great question. We have taken a lot of time over the last couple of years to really understand the competencies that would make one successful, regardless of their job in the organization. And so we've created a couple of different competency models. One that's a general competency model, one is a leadership competency model, and then another that has a technical competency model for every business unit that's part of our organization. And so we spent time trying to understand what those, behaviors were and the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so employees have a foundation of, even if you're looking across the organization, you understand what those core skills are, those core competencies are to be successful in the organization, regardless of what your title is. These competencies, I should say, are the ones that are foundational for success. And we did that by looking across the organization, doing, engagements and surveys and conversations with leaders and staff. And these are the ones that rose up to be really core. So that gives us a really good foundation of assessing what the skills are to be successful in the organization as well. And then we've embedded those into all of our organizational or HR practices, from recruiting to performance management to growth and development.
And what are some of those competencies?
So some of those competencies, the general competency model has about 7 competencies. So they range from adaptability, accountability, problem resolution, priority management, customer orientation, knowledge of policies, processes, and procedures. I like to say that one all the time. So those are some of the foundational general competencies. And then the leadership are kind of 5 core leadership ones, which are strategic planning, collaboration, coalition building, also leading people. You need to be a leader. You have to lead people. Those are some of our core leadership ones as well. And then we really gear all of our training around those competencies.
Amazing that you could just rattle off all those competencies like that. So Darnell, one skill that's on everyone's mind right now is AI. Where is your organization right now when it comes to adopting AI, and how do you hope to grow that skill?
So I think we are in the beginning of AI in terms of looking at it across the institution, not just the chief administrative officer, but really looking at it as a useful tool across the House of Representatives. And so organizational leadership, I should say, is really much focused on understanding what the impact is going to be across our jobs and the experience of work. And so very strategic, focus on understanding, what AI can be and should be in our environment, beginning to kind of roll out tools that are assessed first for its feasibility and value in the organization. And so we're doing that institutionally. But then from a HR perspective, we're beginning to look at those 2 features around value and feasibility. So looking across employee experience, performance management, orientation, recruitment, development, where are those valuable opportunities that AI could have in our environment, and then how feasible is it to kind of implement. And so those are some things that we're doing. Also, we're beginning to look at, okay, what type of skills do we need to have to now think about using AI on a regular basis? One, I would say, is being curious. And being open to learning new and different things and ways as well. And then I would say one tangible piece is we're beginning to look at the prompting piece, which is learning about that literacy too around AI, and looking at ways that we can help people create prompts that will help them in their job. So looking at and exploring that from a career development perspective, where you can do a prompt based on our competencies and begin to connect the dots around potential opportunities, or looking for different skills that may be necessary as you look at the career path.
And you also mentioned that you have a turnover rate of just 6 to 10% on any given year. To what do you credit this low turnover rate?
Well, in the public sector, I think it's a little bit connected to the demographics, the generational demographics of the public sector and the legislative branch. We have a high tenured group, but I also think that it's connected to the work that people are doing. We work in a very unique place where people may not think about change as being part of the foundation, but it really is there. So we always say there's never a dull day because we never know what's going to happen. I think that's connected to, keeping people kind of engaged as well. And then we also do a really focused job on capturing engagement, understanding the engagement in the organization. So we do surveys every other year to understand what's going on, getting a pulse of the organization. So that we can also shift, if you hear a theme there, if we can shift and adapt our kind of approach to work.
So, Darnell, how do you plan to evolve your talent pipeline over the next year?
So I think there's two focuses that we're focusing on, really listening and career development. And so I'll break that down a bit for you. So listening, when we think about that, coaching, I think, is becoming a huge new skill for managers right now. And to ensure that we're retaining people and keeping people part of the organization, really need to ensure that we're engaging staff on a regular basis, where we're creating those safe spaces for individuals where they feel seen and heard in the organization, not just from an institutional perspective, but from the relationship that individuals are having with their staff and kind of immediate teams. That's one piece. And in that conversation, it's also focusing on career growth and career development because we're going to, evolve faster and move quicker than most environments, just because of the nature of the work that we're doing, but also how work is changing. Work is changing from a technology perspective, and also there's going to be some shifts potentially for people retiring. And so we really have to stay in front of that. And so these two simple things around listening and focusing on career development, I think, are going to be really core to how we're ensuring that we're growing our talent pipeline, but also retaining good staff.
And how are you tending to those safe spaces? What are the ingredients that you find important, and how do you adopt them to ensure that they have these safe spaces?
So one, when we think about performance management, really embedding continuous conversation and continuous feedback into the process. So not just talking about goals once a year and at the end of the year, but really embedding, templates or tools, questions that everyone has access to from a management perspective and employee perspective that they can tap into on a regular basis. And so we're ensuring that people have those tools in front of them from an HR perspective, from a tool perspective, but also ensuring that we are training people on how to do that well. And so how do you have that conversation? How do you create that safe space between you and your employees?
And what advice do you have for leaders who are struggling in today's labor market with retaining good talent?
I think it's part of those two things that I just talked about is ensuring that you have a good pulse on what's going on in your organization, but also looking at how you're engaging and bringing people, into the organization as well. Are you tapping into a skills-based hiring approach versus just looking at positions? Are you tapping into and thinking about what are the skills that you're going to need, not just for today, but for the next, couple of years? Are you ensuring that you have a good pipeline internally too, to get prepared and ready for positions as well? So there's a multiple perspective and an approach to thinking about talent development and retention.
Skills-based hiring has certainly been part of the buzz here at SHRM. When did you all start that at CAO?
So it's really part of the competency models that I talked about. After we developed the competency models, we went to each of the individual ones and actually identified interview questions that align to the behaviors, outcomes, and experiences that we'd like to see in the organization. We took those interview questions and also connected those to not just general leadership, but also the functional competencies throughout the organization. So if you're a hiring manager, you actually have a library of questions that really get to the skills that you need in your organization. So we kind of infused, the beginning of skills-based hiring from our competency models.
Amazing, amazing story, Darnell. Last question. What is one piece of advice that has shaped your work or personal life?
So I would have to say adaptability is one of those things. We come into our work with experience and expertise, but sometimes the environment will throw us a curveball, and we hold on to that expertise more than we should. And so sometimes one of the things that's core to me is knowing when to drop your tools, knowing when to shift, and then knowing when to look at the possibilities.
and having been there for over 30 years, I think?
20-some.
20-some years. That has been critical, especially with the fast pace of change that you've described.
Exactly. For me, and I think anyone that's working in HR, you have to be adaptable, you have to shift, and you have to understand the environment you're in.
And that's where we'll end it for this episode of People and Strategy. A huge thanks to Darnell for your valuable insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for tuning in. You could follow the People and Strategy podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, podcast reviews have a real impact on podcast visibility. So if you enjoyed today's episode, leave a review to help others find the show. Finally, you could find all our episodes on our website at shrm.org/podcasts. And while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.
SHRM.